This podcast is made possible by the listener members of Nashville Public Radio.
This is the Nash Villager Podcast. It's November 11th, 2024, Veterans Day. In many other nations that fought in World War I, this is the equivalent to America's Memorial Day. But since this nation already had a day for honoring the memory of people who died in combat, the day of the armistice ending World War I became a chance here to honor this country's living veterans. Nashville's Veterans Day Parade down Broadway begins at 9 a.m. I'm Nina Cardona, and this is your daily digest of what's happening around Middle Tennessee from Nashville Public Radio, WPLN News. And today, I'm going to get a little personal, but it has to do with the broader picture too, I promise. If you're a daily listener, you heard some other voices on and off in the last few weeks. That's because I was pulled away from work suddenly for a family emergency that turned into at-home hospice care and ultimately the death of my mother-in-law, Darby. As our family pulled together to care for her in her last days and then to put together her memorial, we found and pored over a lot of photos. One made me laugh at first. It was taken years ago on a trip to Washington, D.C. that we made when I was first married, me and my husband, his mom, and his brother. In this photo, Chuck and I are off in the background, sitting on a bench, out of focus, unaware that anyone's taking a picture. My brother-in-law's pretty close to the camera, but also looking off to the side and out of focus. And at first, I thought that it was the kind of mistake picture that every roll of film seemed to include back in the days before digital cameras and being able to see right away if you got the shot or not. But then I realized what was in the middle of the picture, behind my brother-in-law, in front of the bench where I was sitting. It was the statue honoring military women who participated in the Vietnam conflict. That statue had been erected just a few years before, on this date, November 11th, 1993, near the Vietnam War Memorial. And of course, Darby took a photo of that statue because it honors her and people she knew very well. She joined the Air Force as a nurse in 1968. For the first time in American history, female nurses were being sent to the front lines of a war. And as a nurse with a decade of experience working in mid-state hospitals, my mother-in-law volunteered for the chance to help heal wounded airmen. As it turned out, Darby was assigned to duty at a frigid NATO base in northern Canada, but she was ready to go to Southeast Asia if that's where her country needed her. And she trained for it. We found a letter she wrote home from field hospital training, describing lectures on treating the wounds caused by chemical weapons, carrying each other on stretchers through a muddy obstacle course, practicing how to carefully walk through a minefield, and pulling people out of a very realistic simulation of an airplane crash. We also found her copy of a letter that Darby sent to leadership on her base, insisting that she be treated according to her rank in an instance where, well, let's just say a male captain wouldn't have had the problem she was dealing with. In it, she wrote, quote, "Gentlemen, when I was recruited into the service in 1968, the recruiters didn't have to talk much, as I very much wanted to serve my country." Today, our military is entirely volunteer. There is no draft. It might be an overly sweeping statement to say that everyone wants to be there, because some folks do find themselves in situations where they don't really see other options for their lives. But no one is forced into service, and a lot of people thoughtfully choose it, knowing what kind of risk comes with joining. But also these days, at the top levels of government, the levels that choose whether to send the military into action, we have fewer and fewer people who've served or have family members in the military. That's true whether it's a Democrat or a Republican in office. And one thing I can't help but worry about in moments when we find our nation in tension or at odds with other countries is whether those decision makers fully consider the humanity of the people who volunteer to potentially go into battle or put themselves in harm's way. It's far easier to play risky games when you think of our troops as things, as chess pieces, as expendable. They are human beings. They are volunteers who said to their country, "I will potentially put my life on the line to protect our nation." That's not something to be taken for granted or treated lightly. And of course, whatever force or military or organization our troops fight is also made up of people with families and closely held beliefs. And we also better be damn sure that there is truly no other solution before we decide to aim at them either. Life is precious. It's the most valuable thing we have. And today, let's remember the sacrifice our living veterans were willing to make and be thankful that they are still with us. In just a few minutes, a respected rapper from East Nashville who rejects the standard hip-hop personas in favor of being truly himself. That's coming up after the newscast.
You've got a lot of things to keep track of. Work schedules, family activities, the ever-growing list of things you need to remember to do. Updating the credit card or banking information for your sustaining membership may have slipped your mind. With just 2 minutes of your time, you can update your payment information and check one more thing off your list. Peace of mind for you, funding for your public radio station. Go online to WPLN.org.
Here's the latest from WPLN News. Former President Donald Trump made a lot of promises during his presidential campaign. One of the biggest was that his administration would carry out the largest mass deportation in American history, and that he would use the military, state, and local law enforcement to locate and arrest undocumented people. Tennessee Governor Bill Lee did not respond to request for comment from the Nashville banner when asked if he would deploy the National Guard in support of Trump's efforts. In the past, Lee has deployed the Guard to help with immigration enforcement at the border and in response to protests after George Floyd's murder by police. But both the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation and MNPD told the banner that immigration enforcement is outside their purview. Nashville's mayor says his priority is to keep Nashvillians safe in the aftermath of Donald Trump's election. Mayor Freddie O'Connell acknowledged that the result went against the desires of many Davidson County residents and encouraged people to, quote, look out for one another.
We've already heard from many Nashvillians worried about what the election means for the community, for our friends, loved ones, neighbors. Nashville's preferences in the election clearly departed from the national outcome. My number one priority is keeping all Nashvillians safe. That value has not changed, and no metro agency will change the work they do for our community or the values that drive that work.
Kamala Harris received more than 62% of the vote in Davidson County. Donald Trump's popularity rose since his last term. He received 1,600 more votes than he did in 2020, while Harris, on the other hand, received 18,000 fewer than Biden did 4 years ago. Meanwhile, Republicans across the rest of the state are expressing their belief and enthusiasm in the wake of President Donald Trump's reelection. In the town of Springfield, where Trump won with 75% of the vote, WPLN reporter Miriam Knight has this dispatch.
Jerry Reynolds had been feeling under the weather. The flu, maybe COVID. He wasn't quite sure. But when Donald Trump won, it was just what his body needed.
It was kind of like a shot of medicine in our... Yeah, I'm elated to have Trump back in office in January, and I think he should have been in 4 years ago.
Reynolds runs a home building business in an antique shop in downtown Springfield, and hanging above the register is a Trump 2024 flag.
Hopefully we'll put America back to work and quit sending money to illegal immigrants across the waters and keep it here where we need it. So, yeah, I'm tickled to death. Know my tax-paying dollars are going to benefit Americans.
Sonny Johnson, who's 77, proudly donned his MAGA hat as he went antiquing with his wife, Sue. Sonny says he's most excited to get Kamala Harris out of the picture and move on from the Biden administration.
I'd be glad to get rid of all their policies and everything. So.
And Sue says
I was so nervous, but
her chest was tight all night Tuesday. When Trump won, finally, she could breathe.
And I love his confidence. I love his excitement. I love his energy. I love everything about him. I think he's the best. I think he will turn the country around. I think he'll do us right, and I'm looking forward to it.
So are a lot of other people in Springfield. Spending the day here, I chatted with Republicans, but also independents, who are excited about Trump's return, especially with the Senate flipping Republican as well. Miriam Knight, WPLN News.
Over the years, Nashville has been trying to make strides in addressing homelessness across the city, clearing out encampments and connecting people with more permanent housing. One of the latest reports from the city's Office of Homeless Services says that 3,800 people experienced homelessness in Nashville at the start of this year. That's up by nearly 1,000 people from the year prior. And more than 250 of them are veterans. The number of unhoused veterans in the city has slowly decreased, according to the report, with Veterans Affairs supportive housing vouchers provided by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development to transition veterans to housing. In June of this year, Operation Stand Down Tennessee opened a new facility for homeless vets, accommodating 42 veterans and acting as the state's only housing for female veterans, according to WKRN. The facility offers wraparound services on site to help veterans establish a plan to secure stable housing. Tennesseans impacted by Hurricane Helene can apply for federal funds to cover damaged property, funeral expenses, and other costs taken on. The head of the Tennessee Emergency Management Agency says if you have applied but were denied, that's not necessarily the end of the story. Agency Director Patrick Sheehan says those denial letters can still be mailed in.
Sometimes that's because of a small clerical error, maybe some piece of identifying information was missing. So keep that letter and make sure that you follow back up and don't let a small obstacle keep you from accessing the aid that you're eligible for.
Sheehan also says he has not seen many federal aid applications for cars that were damaged or destroyed, and he wants to make sure Tennesseans know that's an option. Whether or not a state law taking control of Metro's airport authority violates the state constitution was the subject of arguments in Tennessee's Court of Appeals last week. It's the latest legal move in a series of challenges that the county has made against state laws passed in the 2023 legislative session, like trying to cut the Metro Council in half. All were challenged using the state constitution's Home Rule Amendment, which basically argues that the state legislature cannot pass laws targeting one single local government. BNA is the busiest airport in the state, and one of the legislature's arguments for taking control of it was that they should have oversight of such an essential part of the state's economy. The Nashville Banner reports the judges did not give an indication about when they might release an opinion about the airport authority. As of now, Metro will retain control of the board unless the appellate court overturns the trial court's opinion. A Metro Nashville Police Department sergeant has been relieved of police authority after being arrested for driving under the influence. Michael Dixon was arrested after he pulled his truck over and walked onto a stranger's porch, according to MNPD. The police were called, and when officers arrived, they say it was clear Dixon had been drinking and was impaired. Dixon is a 26-year veteran of the police department who was just promoted in January. You'll find more news anytime at WPLN.org. In recent years, Chuck Indigo has emerged as a leading voice in Nashville hip-hop. The Nashville Scene Alt Weekly just named him the city's best rapper. But senior music writer Julie Height says that it's taken Indigo until his 7th project to figure out that where he wants his music to come from is where he's truly from.
The old Chuck Indigo felt pressure to fit one of two well-defined molds for a rapper. Either talk about surviving the streets or keep to a socially conscious message.
Like, I didn't want to lie, but at the same time, it's like, I want to say something, so.
Over time, he reconsidered.
But that becomes a very hard, persona to keep up. Because it's like, I'm a person, I got flaws. I think it's corny as hell to think that as a rapper, you gotta be some gangster. Think about what a rapper is, he's a poet.
So Chuck Indigo's new album opens with a new mindset.
I left the herd cause I'm more shepherd than sheep. Purpose sold in every move, just watch the blessings I reap. Lessons I keep piling, can't win them all, so I keep smiling. Killing with kindness, even though I wanna be childish and seek balance. Kinda think that the old me would wanna OD. But if you knew me, there's a new me.
The backdrop for these reflections is the East Nashville he grew up in, before waves of gentrification.
I mean, if you say that out loud, 2-parent household in a, lower middle class or middle class neighborhood in Nashville, going to the same school, same church, same all that. That's my story, but I experienced so much. If I just honor that, I think it'll connect with somebody.
Revisiting the brick home where his folks still live.
They've changed some decoration stuff, but for the most part, this looks like what it looked like when I was growing up. So
back then, he wasn't Chuck Indigo the artist. Flipping through a photo album, he points out a copy of his birth certificate. It says Nick Drake. Then he finds an old basketball picture.
This is the first year I played basketball. I was 3 right here.
He has a hard time remembering exactly when he started singing, but it was around that same time.
My mom was the choir director, and we were always at church,
So he was automatically in the choir. First, he was just belting with conviction. Then he learned parts, picked up instruments by ear, and joined the school choir. He wrote a little spoken word poetry, too. But all of that took a backseat to bawling. In college, he was on scholarship all 4 years.
I believed I was going to the NBA up until about my sophomore year in college.
It was around then that he first got into rapping. Not even his closest buddy and rival on the team knew.
We would be matched up all the time at practice, 100%.
That's Cam Porter.
I feel like that's kind of how the relationship grew even more. Like, we respected each other that way because we knew, like I can't show up to practice and not be on my stuff because he's probably going to give it to me.
On the bus ride home from a game, Porter saw his friend typing out lyrics and asked to hear what he was working on. Porter had already dabbled in beat making, so from then on, the two challenged each other musically. They set up a closet studio in their shared apartment and got to work on the first Chuck Indigo album. That moniker originated as a lighthearted nickname.
I honestly wanted to use my name. The only thing was I think he's a folk artist. His name is Nick Drake. Apparently he's really good.
Porter says that was just one more thing pushing Indigo to prove himself.
Everybody knew him as Nick Drake, the basketball player. Like, he really wanted people to take him serious as Chuck Indigo, the rapper. So everything would come off extremely aggressive. Just every line just trying to give you the hardest bar he can think of.
Never had nothing at all. Just hit me down in the ball. Shooting just shots in the fall. Switched up my lane. Chuck Indigo be the name.
Then they both graduated and moved away. Indigo was back in Nashville, getting married and having kids. He briefly tried making music full time, but needed more stable income.
I'm never gonna put my family, their security in jeopardy to try to chase music. Music ain't going nowhere. You know what I'm saying? I firmly believe that.
When adult responsibilities exert pressure, that's when a lot of young artists downgrade music to a hobby or shelve it altogether. Not Indigo. His inner drive and bursts of creativity yielded a string of albums and EPs, an artist collective called Third Eye, and guest features with Nashville peers. Porter stayed close with Indigo, texting him beats, including 2 that wound up on the new album, and witnessing his evolution.
I think it's a culmination of just years of deciding, what type of artist he wants to be, what type of person, what type of dad. I've never seen him so sure about a project.
Some days I wonder if I'll make it. Don't show it on my face much.
Indigo's back to doing almost as much singing as rapping in his trademark needling tone. Until I Get There is full of congenially laid-back beats, but don't expect him to supply any party bangers.
Been going through some things I really can't explain. Everybody got their own problems. Everybody going through something.
Yeah, and I'm okay with that. It ain't my job to do that. You know what I'm saying? And it's but when you're ready to go look at yourself in the mirror and reflect.
That's what Chuck Indigo's music is meant for. For Nashville Public Radio, I'm Julie Height.
Better go outside and get some money. Yes. Go get the money, go get the money. Go get the money, go get the money.
We do this roundup of Nashville news every weekday. Please consider subscribing on your favorite podcasting app. Thanks so much to all of you who have left 5 stars, a thumbs up, or a review in your app of choice. That little bit of love really does tell the algorithms that more people should hear about us. And of course, everything at WPLN News is listener supported. You can make a donation at WPLN.org. And that's it for today. Thanks so much for listening. Let's make this day a good one, and we'll catch back up tomorrow.